you've done a lot of really cool stuff, and I've been there for most of it. But watching you, I get the sense that you feel like the Afghan rescue project may be the most important thing you've ever done.
Yeah, hands down. It's the biggest, the craziest, and the most important thing I've ever done.
Wow.
And it's the most rewarding at a level where it's like, there are times, you know, like that self-actualization thing when you're like, what should I be doing?
Yeah.
And you and I talk about this all the time. Like,
yeah.
Should I be doing more of this? I don't really want to do this, but I have this talent or this skill, and should I be doing this? And I found that over the last year or so, I frequently come back to, but I did that. Which is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's like, I did that, so I know that because that was the culmination of a lot of other things I had done, it allowed me to go in and make that difference for thousands of lives. But on the other hand, it's also like, sometimes it makes it hard to get excited about doing new
Anything
things.
else, yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm like, well,
what can do that?
yeah, you know.
Wait, so I don't know that people know. I have some idea.
Yeah.
But a couple years ago, when the humanitarian crisis started in Afghanistan, you had a lot of familiarity because you'd served there in the army. But you felt called into action again in a civilian capacity. But obviously extraordinarily connected civilian. What happened? I don't think folks know exactly what we're talking about. August of 21, the U.S. withdraws our presence, our military presence from Afghanistan. And you just felt compelled as a citizen to start helping because, well, obviously an extraordinarily well-connected citizen, right, with experience in Afghanistan. What did you do, and why did you feel like you needed to hop back in the mix?
So I'm getting practice now at telling the story a little bit. It's been told in like one place so far. And it's now progressively going to be told in a lot more places, including this. But the short version, if there is one, is August of 2021, my translator, Salam, calls me, who, like a lot of vets, I'm super close to my translator, Salam. He's safe, he's in America, but he calls me and tells me that his nephew and his nephew's whole family is in a lot of trouble. Turns out his nephew, Rahim, had been a banker in Kabul and had been in charge of payroll for all of the organizations, like the multilaterals, that had hired Afghans to forward the cause of democracy. So the United Nations, the US Embassy, like tons of these organizations, like we're talking maybe 100,000 Afghans were on this list, and Rahim was one of the only people who had access to it.
Wow.
So the Taliban wanted that list, and they'd been after Rahim, and Rahim had refused to give that up. They had shot at him, they tried to kidnap him, they grabbed his brother and beat his brother up, but his brother wouldn't give him up. Rahim and his family, their last name is Rufi, the Rufi family, they fled to India for a few years. Then they came back because they were living basically illegally in India and couldn't stay there anymore. And they came back, and shortly thereafter the Taliban took over, and now Rahim was in a heap of trouble because the Taliban were gonna find him. That's when I entered the picture, and I started talking to Rahim, and over the course of a few weeks trying to get him into the airport in Kabul, working with the Marines on the ground, he and I just became really close. And then we were SOL, because the last planes took off, we weren't gonna get out. And by this time I had gathered up a few other fellow vets who also had families, because the thing is, it's a 20-year war. Yeah. Whoever you worked with, now they have a family. So it's not just getting them on a plane, right? And so I had gathered up a few other vets, and also, as you alluded to, I was calling everybody I knew, not just from the Army or from the intelligence corps, or from, really just a lot of people from politics. Every senator, member of Congress on my phone, and it was chaos. Everybody had their own people they were trying to get out.
Wow.
I'm going to yada an important part, but you cut to 3 weeks later of the Raufis dodging the Taliban all over the country, and then myself and a few others staged this fake wedding in Mazar-e Sharif, Afghanistan to...
What?
Yeah, it's a fake wedding. So the problem was, this is a long answer, okay? So the problem was, here's how the game worked. Post-US presence in Afghanistan, it worked like this. If you are on a flight manifest submitted to the Taliban by another country that is visa cleared across the manifest, and you show up at the airport and your name is on a list given to the Taliban government by another country saying, we expect them to land in our country, That's how you capture the flag at this point in Afghanistan, right? Then you're probably going to get out alive, because if you don't show up in the other country, it's an international incident.
Okay.
If, however, they're looking for you and they find you at any point prior to you being inside the airport and on this list with all your paperwork intact, they can do whatever they want. They're the Taliban. They can shoot you in the head, right? So it's the most lethal game of capture the flag ever. So the problem we had is, after it started with the Rufi family and then a bunch of other people came into the mix, pretty soon we had 75 families hiding in various places in Mazar-e-Sharif, and we had to get them all into the airport. And you can't just like call Ubers or have them get on buses, because they're gonna get killed. So we had to get them all in one place, but we had to have a reason to get them all in one place. Hence, my buddy Eric came up with the idea of, let's hold a wedding. So we put them in a wedding hall in Mazar-e-Sharif, where the next ballroom over there was a real wedding. So they had to hide for days. It was supposed to be just hours, but the US government wouldn't let us fly into Al-Udeid in Qatar. So it was days. At one point, the Taliban crashed the wedding in the ballroom next door. Everybody had to stay in there and be quiet. It was terrible, man. And then eventually, the nation of Albania granted us landing rights and a visa-cleared flight manifest, because Albania's tourist season was winding down, and
wow.
They felt, well, yes, we could fill these hotels. So our folks lived in Albania in like an oceanside resort for about 2 years. And now the Raoufi family, Raheem's family, lives 6 minutes from my house, and we have dinner with them at least once a week. And
you brought them to KC.
Oh, it's amazing. They're like they're the only family that came to Kansas City. And if you ask them why, they'll say to be with our family, the Kanders.
Wow.
My daughter refers to the Raoufi. She's, Bella's 3.
Yeah.
She refers to the Raoufis as the Raoufi Kanders.
That's awesome.
So it's the greatest thing ever. Yeah.
And now the Afghanis who you got out of imminent danger from the Taliban, they're all over the world now. Right?
All over the world.
Not just in the States.
A lot of them in the United States, a lot of them in St. Louis.
Really?
Because the nation of Albania needed some official governmental assurance that these people weren't going to be there forever. That was not something I could get from the United States government.
Right.
It was something I could get on short order from our friend, the mayor of St. Louis.
Mayor of St. Louis.
I swear to God, this is the conversation I had with Tashara, okay?
Tashara Jones.
Tashara Jones, hero of this story. I call
Wow.
Tashara and I say, Tashara.
Who we were in the State House of Representatives with 15 years ago.
On the floor trying to work Tupac lyrics into our floor speeches for each other, yes.
Who, by the way, I made it a point to sit third row, left of center, as a 16, 17-year-old at Greater Mount Carmel Baptist Church every Sunday, because that was her seat. Like, this is...
I have sat next to her in that seat.
Yes.
And,
She now has a bunch of Afghani St. Louisans.
Yes. Here's the scene. Let me paint the picture for you, okay?
Crazy.
So, okay, we're running out of time. They've been in the wedding hall for days at this point.
Right.
The Taliban are, I think, getting pretty suspicious. What's going on in this other ballroom? We're getting nervous. We got to make Albania happen. Albania needs official governmental assurance. I call Tashara. I was like, what's she doing? She said, I'm getting Aiden out the door for school. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I have written a letter for you to sign. It makes all sorts of promises you can't keep, reaches all sorts of legal conclusions that are pretty specious. I don't have time for you to make any edits or really ask any questions, and you really can't even tell your staff, and I need it back in 15 minutes. And Tashara, God love, I said, but if you do it, I promise you'll save hundreds of lives. And Tashara said, send it right now. I'll be at the office shortly. I'll have it back to you. And I got it back really quickly. And I sent that to Albania, and they were impressed by that official governmental assurance. And that's a big part of how that and the St. Louis business community helping us keep these folks housed in Albania.
Yeah.
A lot of them are in St. Louis now.
And now she's got some Jones voters for life. Maybe we'll get them citizenship.
She's well, to the credit of her and the St. Louis business community, what they all figured out was, going back to the Bosnians, when a lot of the population was sort of filled back in after that war, they said, we have a need for more workers. And so, a lot of other cities at that point were like, we're good on Afghans, thanks. To St. Louis's credit, they were like, no, we want them. And that was very cool.
This is crazy.
It's saved their lives.
Wow. You saved their lives.
I was never endangered. So they dodged the Taliban. They took the risk of the reason I tell this story is people are going to meet a lot of Afghan evacuees, a lot of Afghan Americans over the next few years. I want people to know every one of them they met is a hero. In order to get to the point where people like us felt the need to bring them here, felt the promise to bring them here. That means they did a lot for U.S. forces and they did a lot for the coalition. But then on top of that, now you're doing...
These were like favored Afghanis.
These were interpreters, journalists, judges, members of parliament, people who did things at great risk, people like Raheem, who all he had to do was literally give them a password to a list and they would have let his family alone, but he refused to do that.
Raheem stood tall.
Raheem stood tall.
Wow.
Raheem is the most resilient person I've ever known.
Wow.
And is now one of my, I mean, we refer to each other as brothers. He's one of my closest friends. I mean, his kids call me Uncle Jason, you know, they're part of our family, but you know, I want people to know, like, then the people who got here, they're like the most industrious of the most industrious, because the Roofies and all the other families, they had to, what they had to do to dodge the Taliban and the leap of faith they had to take all these documents, you know, like in our jobs when you get like a certificate that says, congratulations, you completed Excel training or whatever it is. We don't even think about it, right? They printed everything like that off and saved it because they knew that one day if the Taliban took over, they would need every piece of paper they could possibly have that would show that they worked with the coalition. In order to do this with us, we called it Operation Bella after my daughter, and after her great-grandmother who was a refugee. In order to do this with us, they had to send all of that to us digitally and then burn it, because if the Taliban found it on them, they'd be killed. So that's the kind of trust they had to have. And then what started with the Roofie family became Operation Bella and the wedding party, we call them, and then that eventually became Afghan Rescue Project, which played a role in saving 2,100 people in other operations, and then that became American Rescue Project, which is now doing things in Ukraine and all that.
I think about a couple things. Obviously, I'm a Negro. We've talked about this many times. But I think about...
Hold on. The people watching should know that every opportunity you have to use that word in my presence in a way that might make me uncomfortable, you have grasped, including like in elevators with random white people we don't know. So undefeated. It is important that that stay in, because that is a tradition and an important part of our 20-year friendship. So
I am undefeated.
Please
I've never
continue.
missed that shot. So I think a lot about like how I got to St. Louis, or how some of our cousins got to Detroit or Pittsburgh, and ultimately it often comes down to, in the Great Migration, where did your family run out of money on the train, right? Or where did your uncle have a job promised, or whatever. And I think about this, you know, how did the Raufi family, for generations to come, end up in Kansas City, or how did Tashara's people end up in St. Louis? That's so fascinating, man, and heartwarming. That is like generational legacy stuff, right? The second thing I'm thinking is, if you win a Senate race in 2016,
doesn't happen.
None of that happens.
Absolutely.
And this is thousands of lives. So
and
what's more important?
Not only that, let's say you don't win the Senate race. Let's say everything plays out the way it's supposed to, except I don't go get help. You know, and I stay in politics and that kind of thing. Then what happens at that moment is, I think that the highest utility I have is to go on cable news and try and protect the Biden administration from criticism, as opposed to what ended up happening, which is, and I'm not criticizing the Biden administration right now, I'm just saying what ended up happening is I went around the administration. I went around the administration. And as far as like the legacy of it, like what I think about all the time, what motivated me more than anything else in all this is when I would look at the pictures of Raheem's little girls. 7, and you know, he's got triplets, a boy and 2 girls that are 7, and then his oldest daughter, Sana, who, well, they were 7 then, and then she was 8. They're the same age. Sana has the same birthday as Bella. And so like, when I looked at them, I saw Diana, because you know, Diana came over as a refugee at that age from Ukraine. And so when I think about that, like what I get excited about, Raheem doesn't get excited about this, but I do. Those little girls are not going to have that much of a memory of Afghanistan and of the time that they had to flee to India and all that, and even that much of Albania. So in like 6 or 7 years, when they're coming home to Raheem and they want the same trivial seeming Gap jeans or whatever, and they just get to be like somewhat you know, lightly entitled American girls, like I like get really emotional thinking about it. Like that's to me like the best part of it is like, because I'm gonna be that old man who's like at their graduations.
Some would argue we are.
But I'm gonna be the older man at their graduations and at that stuff, and watching them complain to their dad about this or that, and that's what makes me the happiest.
In-state tuition at Mizzou, right? Like, because you were able to pull together,
or
incredible,
or beyond, you know, like so. Anyway, but that's what I think about.
You know, typically we come out here and I ask folks for some advice to your younger self. But I remember I was a couple years ago. I think we all struggle with like the recovering politician thing and what do I do now, and trying to find some purpose in what you're supposed to be doing now, and that whole thing. You and I have discussed it for hours.
And part of that whole thing is the politician part that complicates it is the knowledge that the world sees you a certain way that's constantly reflected back to you. Like I'm aware that in the zeitgeist, to the extent the zeitgeist thinks about me anymore, which I'm comfortable with the fact that it's a lot less than it ever was.
Well, they will if they hear about this.
But I'm aware that I exist as a politician, even though I don't feel like one. So, but anyway, go ahead.
So I remember struggling through this, maybe during the pandemic when everybody was struggling with everything, and I called you, and you told me the story of Ozymandias. Like, what's that about? And like, how does that thought kind of guide you and what you did, and being able to find some purpose post politics?
So if I remember right, because now it's like a literature test, but is Ozymandias is I think a short poem. I don't know who. So maybe you can cut that in at the bottom of the screen. But it's just about this old monument in the sand that's now decrepit and wrecked to this leader who had created all these monuments to himself, and now it's just stuff in the sand. Nobody knows what it is, and I think it helps me to think about things in terms of I want to be of the greatest utility to the people who are here while I'm here, and when I think about it as anything greater than that, it's just too much. Like it's
ephemeral.
It's ephemeral and it's intimidating and it's impossible to achieve. And so it's like, anyway. But so that's how I think about that now. I try. That's how I try and stave off those thoughts of like, well, should I be doing this or that? And that kind of stuff.
Wow.